Hello and welcome to the JSA Studio. I'm your host, as always, Nathan, and today I'm coming at you with another mock draft. But in this video, it's going to be a little bit different. Rather than doing a what I would do mock draft where I kind of go through and use opinions on players that I have, instead what I'm going to do here is we're going to explore a situational mock draft. And basically what I mean by a situational mock draft is, what if something unexpected happened early on in the draft? How would that reshape the context of the rest of the draft? And the reason that I like to do stuff like this is because typically something unexpected happens in the first 10 picks or so. And then that kind of has a domino effect down the board. The situation that we are going to be exploring today is, what if the Patriots take Marvin Harrison at 3 instead of a quarterback? So in this scenario, I'm going to go ahead and say that the Patriots are not as high on Jaden Daniels as I am. So they go ahead and decide to stay at 3 and take Marvin Harrison Jr. there. So we're going to be using the PFF mock draft simulator for this video. It's my favorite one. I've used it for all of my mock drafts, basically. And as you can see on the screen over here, Caleb Williams went 1, Drake May went 2. And in pretty much all of my mock drafts, that's going to be number 1 and number 2. I might do a what if Jaden Daniels goes number 2 video. Probably not. I just probably won't have time. And then, according to the scenario of this mock draft, Marvin Harrison is going at pick 3. Now, we get to talk about the Arizona Cardinals at pick 4. This is a spot where I could be talked into trading down, specifically for a team like the Vikings, or potentially even a team further down the board like the Raiders or somebody else, where all of a sudden Jaden Daniels is available for the getting, so you can go get him. However, in this scenario, as I am the pretend general manager of the Arizona Cardinals, I'm not going to trade back unless I can get a first-round pick this year and a first-round pick next year. And the only team that could do that would be Minnesota. So basically, I want 2 first-round picks this year and another first-round pick next year to go along with the first-round pick that we already have later on in this draft. And then all of a sudden, we can really kickstart this quote-unquote rebuild. I don't actually think it's really a rebuild because they have the franchise quarterback in Kyler Murray. But I'm not willing to do that. I don't think Minnesota would be willing to give up as much as I'm going to ask for them to move up to 4. Not only that, but I think Minnesota might be willing to sit there and wait and say, hey, maybe we'll go get whoever falls past the Giants for a hell of a lot cheaper. So we're going to stick and pick here, and we're going to take Malik Neighbors. I do think Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison is a legitimate conversation in terms of who is wide receiver 1 in this class. It kind of just depends upon if you want an X wide receiver or a guy who can play in the slot or play the Z. And I think the Patriots would want a big-bodied receiver who's a very high floor type of guy to just give them something in that receiving room. Arizona, I think, would prefer the playmaking ability and separation of Malik Neighbors over someone like Rome Odunze. However, at pick 5, this is also a very popular trade-down spot in mock drafts. But in this scenario, and me being in charge of the Chargers here, I'm not willing to trade down. Because if I trade down, specifically with a team like Minnesota or Denver or the Raiders, I think 2 more wide receivers come off the board. And then all of a sudden I'm staring down the barrel of wide receiver 5 in this draft class. And I really like wide receiver 5 in this draft class. I've got, I think, 6 with top 20 grades. But I'm not going to do that when I can take a surefire, bona fide stud on the outside, X receiver, exactly what this team needs, exactly what Jim Harbaugh needs for his offense, and someone that he got to see up close and personal in the national title game. That is correct. We are going with Rome Odunze out of Washington. And the New York Giants here at 6 are absolutely shitting themselves. And they're like, how in the world did this happen? Because this kind of throws a monkey wrench into what the Giants were planning on doing. Because guess what? We're going Jaden Daniels here. I have a top 10 grade on Jaden Daniels. I really, really, really like Jaden Daniels. I think he's definitely worth the pick here. And even though the Giants don't have a great supporting cast, he doesn't need to play this year. They can play Daniel Jones and let Daniel Jones prove that he's either somebody that a team might want to trade for. Otherwise, you can cut his ass and then you start Jaden Daniels in year 2. He doesn't have to play this year. They got a ton of open cap space. They got draft capital, or I would assume it would probably be another pretty solid, like, top 10 most likely pick next year. So they could add other weapons or offensive linemen there and in free agency and maybe later on in this draft to help develop Jaden Daniels in the future. All that being said, I am still skeptical of the fit because I think it will likely be a new regime after this season. And even though I do think Jaden Daniels does have the potential to play right away and play very well, I'm not positive year 1 he's the kind of guy that can save a coach's job. And because of that, I'm not necessarily certain how well that's going to play out with the Giants here, which is why I don't actually think they're going to go quarterback in real life. But in this situation, Jaden Daniels is just too good to pass up. And now we move on to the Tennessee Titans at number 7, and they're going to take Joe Alt. I think this is like the lock of the draft. I don't particularly believe that his ceiling is going higher than 7, Joe Alt's ceiling. That is, I don't really think he's going to go higher than 7, and I don't really see a scenario where he's falling past the Titans at 7. I felt the same way about Bijan Robinson last year, where I felt like the Falcons was his ceiling and also his floor. But this year, Joe Alt, I'm almost as confident as I was with Bijan Robinson last year. I just really genuinely feel like Joe Alt should be looking at homes in Nashville, Tennessee already. All that being said, I love Joe Alt. He's damn near a surefire 10 to 15 year long franchise left tackle in the NFL. He is a very, very, very good offensive tackle prospect. Moving on to Atlanta at 8, except for not really. We're going to do a trade with Atlanta, but it is not going to be the trade that you think it's going to be. Meaning, I'm not going to have Minnesota trade up in this spot. Instead, I'm going to have the Denver Broncos do it. So we're going to go over here to trade, and we're going to go to Denver. There we go. And I got to do whatever I got to do to just put it through the system here. But I do think that this is going to involve maybe this pick, and then maybe we do that. I think that's pretty fair here. If Atlanta falls back into the 3rd round with their 2nd round pick, they get a 1st round pick next year from Denver. And I get that Denver fans might not be willing to make this trade. I think Sean Payton is. So I'm just going to force this trade. We're just going to force the trade. And then we're going to go back here. And Atlanta, or rather Denver here, is going to take J.J. McCarthy. I'm not sure about J.J. McCarthy as a top 10 pick. And I'm not particularly sure about him going to Denver. But Sean Payton is a certified QB whisperer. And J.J. McCarthy does fit his scheme very, very well. So I think in year 2 or 3, you could start to see J.J. McCarthy start to reach that ceiling as Denver kind of gets back into the swing of things with Sean Payton. It is going to take some time, but they do have weapons. The offensive line is okay. They can kind of run the ball. They have a few pieces on defense, so it's not like a total catastrophe or anything. But I think J.J. McCarthy going to Denver wouldn't be the best spot for him. I think the best spot for him would probably just be the best spot for all quarterbacks, and that, in my opinion, would actually be the Raiders. I would put the Vikings at 2 and then Denver at 3, and then like the Giants at 4. Not talking about the top 3 teams because they're their own discussion. As far as fits for J.J. McCarthy or someone like Bo Nix or Michael Penix, etc., etc. Needless to say, I do like the fit. I'm just skeptical about how well he's going to be in year 1 and year 2 because he does need to sit, in my opinion. And with Denver not really having anybody at the quarterback position, I don't think he's going to sit. So that does draw me a little bit of concern, but the upside is there. The coaching is there. He's going to have enough talent around him to where he's not going to be thrown into the fire and asked to do everything by himself. But it is a risk, definitively. But it is one that, A, I think I would be willing to take, and B, I think it is something that Sean Payton is going to be willing to do. I think if Sean Payton maybe already had an interview with J.J. McCarthy, but I think if he does have an interview with J.J. McCarthy, he's going to fall in love, and he's going to be like, we got to do whatever we have to go and get this guy. Moving on to Chicago at number 9. This one right here is probably one that's going to surprise some people, just because I'm much higher on him than PFF in the general consensus. I'm taking Brian Thomas Jr. here. He is an ex-receiver, and when you think about the Bears, they don't technically need a wide receiver, but the wide receivers that they have, you have DJ Moore, he's a Z, he's on the outside. You have Keenan Allen, he's a slot, he's going to play the slot. You have Cole Kmet at tight end, he's a Y, he's going to do tight end things, he's pretty good, a borderline Pro Bowl caliber player. But they don't really have an X receiver, and that's what I think Brian Thomas can be at the next level. Also, giving more pieces to Caleb Williams, who we took at 1, is always going to be a good idea in my mind. I am always going to want to surround my quarterback with receiving weapons and talent, and with Brian Thomas Jr., the Bears might legitimately have the best wide receiving core in the NFL. Like, legitimately, they might have the best wide receiver core in the NFL year 1 for Caleb Williams to go along with what I would quantify at this moment in time as a good offensive line, although I do think it has the potential to be better if they hit some day 2 draft picks, which we're not going to get into in this video. But the offensive tackle class, I am more willing to wait on than I am to wait on a wide receiver, because the drop-off between Brian Thomas Jr. and the rest of this class is way steeper than the drop-off between tackle 2 and the rest of this class. So I am going to take Brian Thomas Jr. here. Moving on to the Jets with the 10th pick of the draft. And what are we going to do with the New York Jets? They kind of went out in free agency and made not necessarily what I would quantify as splash signings, so to speak, but definitely some big-time names that most fans know. Tyron Smith at left tackle and Mike Williams at the wide receiver position. They also made some other savvy signings as well. The one signing, though, that I'm not sold on is Morgan Moses at right tackle. Morgan Moses, for the majority of his career, has been a solid right tackle. Like, he's been good. He's never blown you away, but he's never been a liability either, really. But his play has steadily declined over the past few seasons as he has started to become a little bit long in the tooth, so to say. And he is someone who maybe early on in the season I'm okay with playing while the player I'm going to pick for them learns the ropes a little bit. That player is going to be Fuaga out of Oregon State. He's the best right tackle in this class. He might be the second best offensive lineman overall. I think probably so at this point. I do think he will struggle with the speed of the game and speed rushes around the edge early on. However, he is a good enough athlete to be able to develop counters to stuff like that. He's extraordinarily powerful. Worst case scenario, I think you've got a decade-long starter at right guard. Best case scenario, you've got an all-pro right tackle. I really like Fuaga. Now, moving on to Minnesota at 11. And they kind of got screwed because I don't think they were willing to match what Denver offered to trade up with Atlanta. And I think that's good because I'm not really sold on trading up for a quarterback if I'm Minnesota. Because I think someone's going to be there at 23 that I'm pretty confident in taking in this scheme. And I think he would have a lot of upside even in year one. Even though I'm probably not going to ask him to start year one, I'm probably just going to roll with Sam Darnold. And I think with the receivers and tight end that we have, as well as a solid offensive line, well, not even solid, one of the best offensive lines in football when healthy, I think the quarterback position becomes less important, so to speak. I don't think they're going to win the Super Bowl. They might not even make the playoffs with Sam Darnold at the quarterback, but I think they can be a competent team and focus on filling out the rest of the roster and then make the move for a big-time quarterback, either via trade for somebody who potentially becomes available or through trading up in a draft next year. I do think that there are quarterback prospects that would be potentially worth trading up for next year. It is very, very early to be talking about that, but I don't think it's some bleak-ass Kenny Pickett is the best quarterback in the class sort of thing next year. I don't think it's like that. But Minnesota on the clock here. Who are they going to take? And they lost Danielle Hunter, but they did replace him with Jonathan Grenard, who I do really, really like. They also signed Andrew Van Ginkel to be another sort of hybrid off-the-ball linebacker sort of player, and he does fit the Flores scheme very well. So who are we going to take here? Do we just go best player available and take Brock Bowers? Do we just go a corner, Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell? Do we go D-tackle with Byron Murphy? Do we go edge? Answer to that question is that we're going to go edge. And the guy that I'm going to have them take is Jared Verse, defensive end out of Florida State. I am very, very high on Jared Verse. He is my edge one in this class. I have a top 10 grade on him, so getting him at 11 is a little bit of a steal. And also, I think he's a fantastic scheme fit for what Flores wants to do defensively. And I think he's an immediate contributor. I think he's going to be very, very good, even in his rookie year, potentially even pushing for rookie of the year on the defensive side of the ball. Atlanta at 12. Obviously, this is something that's been done a million times, and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to take Dallas Turner here. I think Dallas Turner was born to play on this Atlanta Falcons team. They desperately need edge rush help. They also kind of need an interior guy as well, which is Byron Murphy. I also could have thought about Byron Murphy, but I didn't. Either way, Dallas Turner, I think, is going to be an immediate contributor as a pass rusher. I do think he's going to need time to become an effective run stopper at this next level, but I do think he is someone who is going to be able to produce early on as a situational type of player and eventually blossom into one of the better edge rushers in the NFL. The Raiders are on the clock next. And this is a interesting position for them to be in because they also probably need to address the quarterback position. Now, this is year one of a new regime, so maybe that isn't as pressing of a need as it would be if this was not year one of a regime. So I do think that they can kind of afford to just sit here and take the best player on the board, and that's Brock Bowers. I understand full well that they already have a pretty solid tight end in Michael Mayer, but Brock Bowers can do more than just be a wide tight end or occasionally split out into the slot. He is so good. He can do anything. He could be a wide receiver. You could put his ass on the outside and have him play X, and he'll be good enough to be on the field. He is too good of a player to fall this far, and I'm not going to overthink it by drafting a player that is potentially not as good as Brock Bowers is going to be, just because we either need to reach on a quarterback or we already have Michael Mayer. Now, I'm not as high on Michael Mayer as other people were. I wasn't heading into the draft class last year, and I'm still not particularly. I think he's going to be a solid starting tight end. I don't necessarily see a whole lot of special in him. But Brock Bowers has special written all over him. He's my second highest graded tight end ever. And I think year one, you're looking at a 1,000-yard, 10-touchdown player, Pro Bowl caliber, instant plug-and-play guy. And there isn't another one of those on the board. So we're just going best player available here. The Saints are up next, and this is also a pretty quick and easy decision for me. I am going to go with Olu Fashanu, which I've been saying Fashanu for as long as I've known he's existed. But it has been clarified recently that it is not Fashanu, it is Fashanu. So I'm going to do my best to call him that. I think Fashanu has franchise left tackle written all over him. He's a very, very good athlete. He didn't necessarily test like that, but it's written all over his film. I mean, he had good test numbers, but he didn't have blow you away test numbers. But he had very, very good test numbers still. I really like Olu Fashanu. I think the Saints cannot afford to take anything other than an offensive tackle here. Trevor Penning has not worked out. Ramczyk, I believe, is hurt and will miss all of next year, or at least the vast majority of it. So this is the pick. I think Fashanu can come in and play right away. I think he's going to need time as a run blocker, but I think day one, he's one of the better pass blocking left tackles in the NFL. The Indianapolis Colts are up next, and they are going to go with a wide receiver. Now, in real life, I think there's a significant possibility that this pick is traded for T. Higgins, and perhaps like a third-round pick or something like that. But I'm not going to do player trades like that right now, because I also genuinely believe the Bengals want to keep T. Higgins on the team. They just want to do it at a price that is not what T. Higgins is looking for right now. All that being said, I'm going to take, in all honesty, a very similar player, in my opinion, to T. Higgins, except for I think he's faster, and that's A.D. or Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. I don't know if he goes by Adonai or A.D. anymore. He went by A.D. at Georgia, and then it was Adonai at Texas. I don't know the difference. I don't particularly think he's specified if he wants it one way or another, but he's listed as Adonai, so I'm going to call him Adonai. I really, really like Adonai Mitchell. I have a top 20 grade on him. I think he is going to be a certified, very, very good wide receiver year one and a Pro Bowl caliber player in year two. I think he gives the Colts something that they don't have right now, and that is a deep threat and a big-bodied receiver that can go up and catch it. Hypothetically, they have a deep threat with Pierce, and they also have a bigger body that can go up and catch it with Michael Pittman, but they don't have a guy that can do both. And I also just flat out and straight up don't think Michael Pittman is a wide receiver one in the NFL, and I do think Adonai Mitchell is. I think one of the very few needs that the Colts have is a genuine #1 wide receiver, and I think Adonai Mitchell gives them that. Seattle is on the clock next, and this is going to be the easiest pick of all time for me. I am sprinting to the podium to select Jackson Powers Johnson, the center out of Oregon. I have a top 20 grade on him. He's tremendously good. He's like 6'3" and 330 pounds. Zone blocks very well. Power blocks very well. Has upside in either scheme. I think he could genuinely be a Pro Bowl caliber center year one in the NFL. And Seattle desperately need some help along their interior of that offensive line. Hypothetically, assuming they can get healthy, they've got a left tackle and a right tackle, and now they've got a center. Guards are the least important position along the offensive line, in my opinion. So you can kind of fill those out with guys who are just not liabilities, and then you can help Geno Smith get back to his 2022 form, where he was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. This next pick for Jacksonville is, I think, the one where we're going to start to see the effects of what happened at 3 start to play out here a little bit more. And that is going to be that the Jacksonville Jaguars, who in my opinion desperately need a wide receiver, they're going to take Ladd McConkey. They lost Calvin Ridley, who was the closest thing they had to a #1 wide receiver. And they don't really have a guy on that team. Christian Kirk is solid as a #2. Zay Flowers is solid as a #3. I don't even know if he's on the team still. I think he is. I'm not positive. But I think Ladd McConkey is the last receiver in this class that has like 1,300 yards, 8 to 10 touchdowns a year consistently in him. I think if he was healthy, he might legitimately have a top 20 grade for me. He doesn't. He has a top 40 grade for me, which makes this a little bit of a reach here, but it's not the end of the world. I do really, really like Ladd McConkey, but more than that, he fills the same role as a Calvin Ridley does. He's a Z wide receiver. I think he steps in and plays that role year one just as effective as Ridley was this past season. The Cincinnati Bengals are now on the clock at 18. Cincinnati right here, I think, is going to kickstart a little mini run on offensive tackles. I'm going to have them take offensive tackle here. I'm going to have them take Amarius Mims out of Georgia. I really, really like Mims. I think he has upside as a left tackle or a right tackle. There were reports said by him specifically, like Amarius Mims actually said this, where during practice he was taking about 40% of his reps on the left side. So that is somewhat encouraging that he was at least practicing being a left tackle. So I think year one, maybe you start him at right tackle. And then potentially if you move on from Orlando Brown, I don't know what that contract situation looks like. All I know is that he hasn't really lived up to it. But if you can move on from Orlando Brown, then you can move Mims over to left tackle, where I think Mims has a floor that is, at this point, Orlando Brown's ceiling. That at this point, I think, is Orlando Brown's ceiling. And his ceiling is like all-pro caliber offensive lineman. So I love this pick for Cincinnati. And speaking of picks that I love, I have the Rams kind of going off the board here with cornerback. And they're not going to take Quinyon Mitchell, even though Quinyon Mitchell is my #1 corner. They're going to take Nate Wiggins. Because Nate Wiggins fits that cover 4 defense that the Rams run so well to a T. That is the best player in this draft that they could draft at that position to play cover 4. Even though Quinyon Mitchell is a better all-around corner than Nate Wiggins, I do think it's kind of close. I have Nate Wiggins, spoiler for my top 10 cornerback rankings, which will come out after this video. But Nate Wiggins right now is my #2 corner and my number 2 defensive back in general, behind Mitchell, who I have at number 1. I really like Nate Wiggins. He fits their scheme beautifully. The Steelers are on the clock at 20. I'm going to have them take Troy Fautanu out of Washington. Miami at 21 is another offensive tackle. Here I have them going J.C. Latham out of Alabama. He's not the tackle that I have graded next, but they don't need a left tackle. They need a right tackle, and they do kind of desperately need a right tackle. Now, Philadelphia at 22. Could they go edge rusher here? The answer to that question is yes. They're trying to trade Hassan Reddick. They had to move on from a couple of their depth pieces as well. And I think that could be where we go here. They got a new defensive coordinator and a new scheme, so they could go edge here. But they're not going to, because Quinyon Mitchell, because a couple of teams that could have taken corner decided to take other positions because of the run-on positions and the decisions that other teams made before them. But Quinyon Mitchell is on the board here. That might be the steal of the draft for the Eagles at 22. And you may be thinking that's an unrealistic scenario. And I would agree with you. I think Quinyon Mitchell's most likely going to be gone by 22. However, if you had asked me last year, I would have said Christian Gonzalez's floor was the 6th pick to the Lions, because I was delusional in thinking that the Lions actually would draft a player that I like. Needless to say, he went at, what do you go at, 17 or 18? And I think he was my number 3 overall player, regardless of position, last year. So, yeah, good players fall every year for inexplicable reasons. And that's just so happens in this scenario to be Quinyon Mitchell. Minnesota on the clock at 23. This is another one where we're going off the board here. I'm taking Michael Penix Jr. Now, I said in my quarterbacks video that if I had access to his medical ratings or his medical file, etc., that I would be more comfortable talking about him as a first-round quarterback, because on film, he gives me enough to justify a top 40 selection, in my opinion. After the combine, it came out that his medicals are pretty solid. And also, he did perform well athletically in all of his tests. So, I'm fine with taking Michael Penix here at 23. And more so than that, I love the scheme fit. I love the scheme fit. I would love to see him in a Kevin O'Connell offense, but I would also hate it because I am a Detroit Lions fan. Because I think it would work out. I like them a lot. They've got wide receivers and weapons for days. They have the potential to have a pretty solid run game. They have an offensive line that, when healthy, is one of the best in the NFL, and they have a defense that is also pretty good. I think Michael Penix starting for them probably in year 1 is not enough to get them into the playoffs. But it might be. And he's the only quarterback that they could have taken, even if they had managed to take J.J. McCarthy, or if they had traded up for J.J. McCarthy. I don't think J.J. McCarthy gets them to the playoffs year 1. I think Michael Penix has a better chance to get them to the playoffs year 1 than J.J. McCarthy does. But I think they would understand that, and J.J. McCarthy would likely just sit the whole year, and then they move on from Sam Darnold. That being said, I think if this scenario plays out, and you do see Michael Penix Jr. here to the Vikings at 23, you will likely see him by the midway point of the year. Dallas is on the clock next, and when you look at what they need, they do kind of need depth along the offensive line, and there are players here that I would still be willing to take. Particularly Tyler Guyton is someone that I'm thinking about to be the right tackle of the future. But ultimately, I do think there is a player here that kind of stands out from everybody else, and that is Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle out of Texas. I like Byron Murphy a lot. I do not like him as much as other people do, I will say. I don't think he is a top 10 talent, but he is very, very good. dominant against the run, extremely athletic, very good against the pass. He's got a couple of moves that he can go to in the middle, and he can just win with a bull rush, which is something that you need to be able to do at the next level. Green Bay at 25. This is the easiest pick of all time. Green Bay loves Iowa players. They're going to take Cooper DeJean, and he's going to play corner for them. He's not going to move to safety. He is an outside corner pretty exclusively during his time at Iowa. I don't really understand why people are saying that he's going to move to safety or put him in the slot. According to PFF, he played like 90% of his snaps as an outside corner in his entire career. I don't really understand why people think he's going to be this great versatile piece. I mean, maybe, if you move him to safety and you give him some time to learn the position or to be in the nickel, he could probably be effective there. But I don't see it on film because he just doesn't play those positions. He's pretty exclusively an outside corner. And I do think he will play outside corner for Green Bay. And getting a running mate for Jair Alexander has been something they've been trying to do for a tremendously long time. And had Cooper DeJean been healthy, I'm not positive he's available at this pick. So I do think it is a steal. Also, speaking of steals, Terrion Arnold is going to go to Tampa Bay. I think this is a good draft class for corners if you're picking in like the 20 to 30 range, because I think there's a lot of corners that are going to end up going in that range. But specifically Terrion Arnold for the Bucks, I think it's a good fit. He did play very well in press coverage and in man coverage. However, he was also good in zone. Kool-Aid McKinstry was better than him in zone, but he was still good in zone. Tampa Bay does run primarily a zone defense. However, what they really want is longer corners with press experience, and that is what Terrion Arnold is. I think it's a good fit. I think they get younger and cheaper at the cornerback position since trading Carlton Davis to the Lions. And I overall really like the fit of Terrion Arnold to the Bucks. The Cardinals are on the clock next, and this draft for me with Arizona has to be all about supporting Kyler Murray. And they tried to do that last year with their first-round pick, Paris Johnson out of Ohio State, who I liked a lot. And with the fourth pick of the draft, they took Malik Neighbors here in this mock draft. So we're going to go ahead and give Kyler Murray another player that I really, really like and I'm higher on than the consensus, and that is Zach Frazier, a center out of West Virginia. I have a top 40 grade on him. I think he is a day one starting center who is at least average. And I think by year 3, you're looking at a Pro Bowl caliber center in the NFL. I think he's a very, very safe prospect as well. He could play guard if you want him to, but I think his upside is more defined as a center than it is as a guard, because at the center position, you can take advantage of his movement skills more so than you can at the guard position. Buffalo is up next with the 28th pick, and wide receiver was already a position that I was looking at them before the trade of Stephon Diggs, but now it is a necessity. And I'm going to take someone that did not show that he could fill the same role as Stephon Diggs does in the NFL in college, but someone who I think has a tremendous amount of upside as a Z threat and a deep threat, and that is Xavier Worthy out of Texas. And putting him with Josh Allen, who has potentially the best arm in the NFL in terms of just straight up throwing it deep, getting the fastest player in the NFL because he's the fastest player ever to run the 40. I think that's a good fit. But even more than that, I think Xavier Worthy was held back a lot by Quinn Ewers, who was someone who early on in the year I was pretty high on as a quarterback. Having gone back and looked at Texas film to scout the wide receivers, I don't think that anymore. I do think he's a talented player, but I think in this year's draft class, he likely would have ended up as a day 3 pick, and I think that's why he ended up going back to Texas, because I'm pretty sure that's what the NFL told him. Uh, Either way, I think Xavier Worthy can be more than just a deep threat at the next level. People will want to talk about his size. He's 170 pounds or whatever it is, 178 pounds, whatever it is. I don't remember. He's not very heavy. Cool. There are plenty of wide receivers in the NFL nowadays that are under 280 and producing at a high level. He's not Devonta Smith. He doesn't run routes like Devonta Smith. He isn't good against press coverage like Devonta Smith is. But Xavier Worthy can do more than just run fast. He is someone who I think is an underrated route runner, especially in this class. He is also someone who can take the top off of the defense. Also, Shakir is someone who could potentially step into that Stephon Diggs role, and then Xavier Worthy is the Z receiver on the outside who wins with quickness and speed. I like Xavier Worthy to Buffalo a lot. The Detroit Lions, my team, is on the clock next at 29, and at this point, it's down to 2 players for me. Laiatu Latu out of UCLA and Johnny Newton, as it should be listed here. He has come out and stated that he prefers Johnny Newton, not Jerzon, but PFF here has decided to keep him listed as Jerzon Newton. So the thing with the name, I've said it before, I'll probably say it again in a future video, but I am going to go with Johnny Newton here for Detroit. I do think a true 3 technique is a need for the Lions, but more so they just need pass rush. I'm not sold as other people are about Johnny Newton's upside as a run defender. He does have the requisite size, in my opinion, in terms of just sheer mass to be able to survive as a 3 technique in the run game. But I think he is primarily going to be on the field, especially early on in his career, before he can kind of learn how to win without being more physically dominant than the player you're playing against, in the run game at least. But early on in his career, I do think he's going to be in more of a pass rush specialist sort of role along the interior. And Detroit just kind of needs some punch there. Aleem McNeil was good as a pass rusher last year. DJ Reader is not really a pass rusher. He's more of a pocket pusher, but he's really there to stop the run, and I think he'll fill that role very, very well. So you take DJ Reader off in obvious passing situations, you bring in Johnny Newton, and that defensive line is cooking with gas. Baltimore is up next, and once again, I am torn between Laiatu Latu and another player. And ultimately what it comes down to is the type of player that Baltimore takes. And what is the type of player that Baltimore takes? They take undersized edge rushers who are extraordinarily good athletes, and that fits Chop Robinson to a T. They're still looking for a guy to just be an edge rusher effectively. David Ajabo, one of my favorite all-time players for Michigan Wolverines, just has not worked out. Feda Owe has also not worked out as a pass rusher, despite having a promising rookie year. And they don't really have a whole lot at that position. So they're going to take the same player in Chop Robinson, except I do think Chop Robinson has a higher floor than those 2 players. I think Chop Robinson is going to be, even year 1, a effective pass rusher around the edge. Last 2 picks here, San Francisco and Kansas City. Once again, I am trying desperately to find Laiatu Latu a spot in the first round, and it's just not gonna happen. I think the 49ers would think about him, but I do also think there's a player here that fits their scheme and their need a lot better than Laiatu Latu. What they really need is what I refer to as a 5 technique, or rather someone who plays along the edge in base, but moves inside during pass rush downs. And that's exactly what Darius Robinson's role is going to be at the next level. His tape is really, really good, but the testing is really, really bad. He's a bad athlete, just to be honest with you, at a comparative level for the position. Not great, but he is very, very powerful. He just blows people back on the line of scrimmage. I think he is someone who could play in the interior full time at the next level. If you asked him to put on 10, 15 pounds, I think he could do it. And if you asked him to lose 10, 15 pounds, get down to like 265, 270, then I think he could be a full-time edge. Or you could keep him in the 285, 290 range, which is what I think San Francisco is going to do, and play him on the edge and base and play him inside in pass rush situations, which is the role that Arik Armstead played for that team last year and all of the years before that. So I think Darius Robinson could step up year one and be able to fill the void. Probably not as good as Armstead was, at least last year. I actually thought he was really good last year. But in the future going forward, I think he is someone who has that level of upside to him. The last pick of the draft to Kansas City, I could be convinced to go Kool-Aid McKinstry and get them in outside corner to replace Snead, but ultimately I think that defense is going to be fine without him. I think there are enough guys there that will be able to play at an effective level that I don't think they're going to value drafting a corner this high. And I look at this team, and they signed Marquise Brown, not Browns, sorry. But they signed him, and I think he can be a slot receiver or a Z. You put him on the outside, I think he can stretch the field a little bit, and I think he could be a very good wide receiver, especially in that Chiefs offense with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid calling plays. But what they really need, in my opinion, is an X wide receiver who is physical and can win contested catches. And it just so happens that there's a guy that I have a top 40 grade on that does that very well. And that player's name is Keon Coleman. I'm not going to hit draft quite yet because I do that and it's going to kick me out of this screen here and send me to the recap. I don't want to do that quite yet. Keon Coleman, I think, is someone that was held back by the offense that Florida State ran, and also a little bit by quarterback play, because the quarterback, whose name I'm blanking on right now, was not very accurate and didn't really know how to throw jump balls. And Keon Coleman is the type of player where you do kind of have to be accurate and you do kind of have to know how to throw jump balls, okay? And the way that I can illustrate to this is that there is something called a contested catch rate, or the number of catches that you actually catch when they are contested. And percentage-wise, Keon Coleman's like 43%. And you would think 50-50 balls are 50-50. And if you're at 6'3" and can jump out of the gym, they probably shouldn't be 50-50. A lot of those are bad passes. And they were contested in ways that Keon Coleman was never going to be able to catch the ball, which is why I think that number is a little bit misleading. And the best way that I can illustrate that is that Malik Neighbors, who is not a physical player or a contested catch guy, had a contested catch rate, success rate of like 62.5%. That's because Jaden Daniels is really good at locating balls and really good at throwing deep balls, especially into tight coverage. So I think that has more to do with the quarterback play than it does with him. Now we're going to move on to the recap here. So to sort of recap what happened in this video here, early on there was a run on wide receivers and a sort of surprise trade up for a quarterback with Denver. And because of that, teams had to sort of switch what they were going for. There was then a little mini run on offensive tackles and a couple of the players that fell down the draft before wide receivers picked back up a true run on tackles. And then you started to see some of the corners that I think could go earlier, but fell due to just teams taking other positions. All in all, is this a realistic mock draft? No, but it was a fun scenario to explore, in my opinion. What if Marvin Harrison went at 3? How does that shape the rest of the draft and who goes where? Now, all that being said, I do think some of these picks are more likely to happen than probably the consensus is. I wouldn't be surprised if Brock Bowers fell outside of the top 10. I wouldn't be surprised if the first corner taken was Nate Wiggins, because you got to remember he ran 4.2, and that's a big deal. There are teams that will look at that and say elite football player. Also, the Jags pretty much every year, with maybe the most surprising pick of the first round this year in Ladd McConkey. I think that's a fairly realistic thing that could happen as well. I do really like Ladd McConkey. I like to fit with Jacksonville as well. And I'm not sure he'll be there in the second round. And with the run on the top 5 wide receivers, I do think it is realistic to sort of see a team sort of panic a little bit and just be like, okay, we got to get our guy at that position here, even though it is, in terms of value, probably a little bit of a reach. And that pushed a lot of really good players down the board. Quinyon Mitchell fell in this mock draft, even though I'm likely going to have a top 20 grade on him as a corner, or maybe even a top 10 grade. I haven't finalized grades quite yet, but he is very, very good, and him going to the Eagles is an absolutely absurd outcome. I think he'll learn for a year under Bradbury and Slay, and then probably take over when they likely cut both of those players after this next season to save cap space. I think Michael Penix to Washington is maybe the most interesting pick in this draft, because I do really like the fit. And more so than that, having a rookie quarterback contract is a necessity for the Minnesota Vikings, because they're going to have to pay Justin Jefferson probably north of like $35 million a year. Genuinely. Like, I think that's what he's going to command. And that's borderline quarterback money. Like, there are quarterbacks that make less money than that, starting quarterbacks. And on non-rookie deals, I should add. But I don't really think that's a bad pick. You're probably going to disagree with me. If you do, go ahead and let me know in the comment section down below. But all in all, a lot of these teams are going to pick players that fit their scheme rather than players that are potentially better football players, because the best football players in the draft go to teams where they have a plan to use them and fit their scheme, not the other way around. So I think some of these picks, some of these reaches, quote unquote, is really going to be more about team and scheme fit rather than just overall talent of the player. Like, I am not that high on Darius Robinson, but he plays to that scheme so well, I could absolutely see the San Francisco 49ers taking him in the first round. Potentially also the Lions, even though I would not feel great about that pick. But it is what it is at that point. Anyway, that has been all for this video here. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagree with me at any point, or you just have something to say, go ahead and drop a comment down in the comment section below. And now with the outro out of the way, there's only one thing left to say, and that is that I'll see you next time.